Well, Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, who heads the INB department, has made several important points on the National Press Day. In fact, among the most important points, he says that big tech must give news outlets their fair share as far as news gathering is concerned. Is big tech really the biggest threat to real news? Well, if we look at some of the recent trends as far as new age media is concerned, there are only two big tech platforms that have complete control as far as the access to news online is concerned. And they also control 70% of digital advertising revenue. At the same time, remember, platforms also set rules for the order and display of news. If you search a particular news on Google, for example, Google and Google's algorithm will decide what news article, what news story will come right on top. So readers essentially are guided by the platform algorithm and not by personal choice or the importance of news. So essentially there is no transparency or balance in the news readers and their sort of interaction with news online. And platforms prioritize news based on money and not importance. But the biggest point here is that the primary chunk of the revenue goes to big tech platforms and not the real creators of news. In fact, it takes a lot to gather news. In fact, if you talk about TV news, it takes a lot in terms of news gathering. Nearly 20% of the total revenue that we have goes into news gathering. 40% goes into programming, because remember, programming also involves a great deal of craftsmanship, a great deal of resources in terms of putting news on air. At the same time, things like sales, promos, ads, digital outreach, and of course logistics take a significant chunk of that revenue as well. So when news organizations are putting in so much money, do they also deserve their fair share of money, given the fact that news consumption has shifted online? On Left, Right and Center tonight, we ask, is it time for big tech to give their news outlets their fair share in revenue? Before I bring in my guests, let's quickly listen to what the INB minister had to say.
Second challenge is about fair compensation by the platforms for content created by conventional media. As we see, consumption of news and consumption of content is rapidly shifting from the conventional modes to the digital media. The traditional media is losing out financially because of this change. The investment done in creating a team of journalists, training them, having editorial processes, having methods to check the veracity of news, taking the responsibility for the content, all those investments, which are huge investments both in terms of time and money, those are becoming irrelevant by the way the platforms are having a very unequal edge in terms of the bargaining power they have vis-a-vis the conventional media.
Joining me on the show this evening, Neerja Chaudhary, senior journalist, is with us. Also, Shashi Shankar, who's somebody who's a co-founder of Deep Tech for Bharat, also an ex-CEO of Prasar Bharati. N.S. Napinai, senior advocate, Supreme Court, and founder of Cyber Saathi Foundation, perhaps the most articulate voice on cybercrime and indeed, the cyber patterns. Vipin Pabbi, senior journalist and member of Editors Guild of India, is also with us. Thanks all very much for being with us. Let me begin by asking you, Neerja Chaudhary. The INB minister has made several important points, and in the past decade, in the past 5 years particularly, we have seen a paradigm shift in terms of how news is consumed. Most of us, even us as TV journalists, tend to consume news online. But news outlets that spend a great deal on gathering news, on sending a reporter to the ground, on verification of facts, and then finally putting news out there, do they get their fair share amid this shift as far as news consumption is concerned?
Look, the INB minister has flagged off very important points. The nature of media has changed over the last decade, particularly with new technology, with new communication techniques, with the unprecedented 24/7 streaming of information and news that we now see, which was not the case when I was cut my teeth in journalism. It was a very different world, the conventional media that the minister has spoken about. Now it's become a very highly complex scene. It's not as simple as conventional versus digital versus tech companies, very important points that he has raised. And I think the time has come for the media groups to address these issues, to really take them on board and look at the things that the minister has flagged off. I would say, broadly speaking, again, as an old school journalist, I'm saying this. When the minister talks about conventional suffering at the hands of the digital online media and not being compensated enough, it's a very fair point. All that you invest in training your journalists in those processes, media processes, and somebody else gets the benefit out of it. But I would also be wary that we don't make it a conventional versus digital fight. I would also be wary that the initiative for addressing these issues must come from the media. From within the media. It's very good the minister has flagged off these concerns and has taken the initiative, but the solutions and must come from within the media. I'm one of those who's wary of, governments getting into the act too much. Because I feel regulation. As far as we in the media are concerned, our role is to provide fair, accurate, neutral, objective, truthful, whatever you want to, information, and also hold the government to account, government and political class to account. That is our basic role.
Yes.
And we must not have any of these efforts encroach into that role. That would be, where I'm coming from. I should not be, wary about it, but knowing the way the government's what purposes are. I think the media must take the initiative on it, and it's a very good thing.
Yes, you made an important point that more often than not, media and journalists should have an adversarial relationship perhaps with the government, which is why too much regulation from the government could also do little good. But Shashi Shankar, come in on this point, because what the INB minister also seems to be pointing to is that who takes responsibility for the content. It's not only the cost and the burden of cost that is borne by the news outlets, but also the responsibility and accountability for the content. It's not these big tech platforms like Google or Meta who would take responsibility for, say, an inadvertent mistake that a story might have made online. So ultimately, if the news outlets are gathering news, verifying news, putting news out there and taking responsibility for any potential pitfall or mistake as well, then they should get their fair share.
Absolutely. I think what the minister has raised is an issue that has been festering for quite some time now. As far as accountability is concerned, I think India, especially the Indian media, has a fairly robust self-regulatory mechanism which broadcast news channels already adhere to. Similarly, there are similar rules that have been framed, which I think are yet to take effect because of some litigation, but a similar self-regulatory mechanism is also being proposed for digital news as well. As far as this proposal for compensating news media is concerned, there is a precedent, right? Australia has already passed a law, Canada has passed a law. Though in both the Australian and the Canadian cases, the motivations are slightly different. I think we in India have a big challenge because our digital news is predominantly dependent on foreign platforms, be it YouTube or be it Facebook. Now that creates a particular complication. If you look at what has happened, for example, in recent conflicts like Russia and Ukraine, you could have a big tech platform that suddenly can shut you off completely, and then you're not only shut out of monetization, you're also shut out of getting your message out. Right. So this is a particular challenge for Indian news media that we are disproportionately dependent on foreign tech platforms, and that needs to be addressed. One aspect, of course, is the issue of sharing of revenues. The other issue is, of course, of algorithms, because often these algorithmic changes are quite opaque. News organizations don't exactly know, what changes have been made and how that impacts their monetization models. Also, the platforms, by amplifying certain kinds of news items, and certain outlets are making editorial decisions through their algorithms, and that also needs to be addressed as well. So I would say, it was very timely that the minister brought this up, and I hope we'll see certain moves on this front soon.
I think that's an important point you made, because NS Napinai, this whole business of algorithm, that has completely changed the game. It's all a blur. Nobody really knows how it works. There's a lot of money that is being pumped into it as well. And, just break it down for us. How does this algorithm business work? Because, of course, there are certain keywords, and SEO, as we call it in journalism, in online journalism these days, that is one part of it. But, of course, it's a different ball game altogether. What comes on top, what news item is given priority over another, all this depends on a lot of money and that entire algorithm that now seems to be the most important thing.
Yes, and the way an algorithm plays is critical. Now, if you look at what has already been mentioned, some very good points have been raised, and I just wanted to add that US is also looking at it. They are interestingly calling it the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act. So they're talking about the necessity for preserving journalism in the right way, given the fact that it's a democratic aspect. So Vedant, the issue that you raised about algorithms and how they play also critically impact democracy. And that's why I said this is an issue that needs to be addressed. This is where I feel that the antitrust laws are likely to be one of the strongest to counter this aspect. Some of the cases that have already come up in India deal with this, but more in the context of a commercial issue. So for instance, where an algorithm throws up business A as opposed to business B, and where they are able to show that it is because big tech is favoring business A and not that it is happening organically, then the antitrust laws have been applied to penalize and also to remedy these issues. So we have to see now how it would play out in the context of journalism. And here I just wanted to point out a few more legal issues here. Paying for news in this way, usage of another person's work, is not just a moral issue, it's a legal aspect. So the person who creates the content owns the content, and they're entitled to be recompensed or to block someone else from using it. The negative right is what flows to you from copyright. Secondly, as a journalist or as a news media, you would want the widest spread. So the one part where I digress or disagree in terms of the usage of big tech in some manner harming you is that you can't be without big tech because you want your spread to be far and wide. And it's not like news media is relying only on big tech when they are online. They do have their own digital platforms too. It is more for the wider reach that they are opting for big tech. And the Australian construct of using agreements to ensure a fair distribution seems to be a good approach. We'll have to see whether government will play a role at all or not in this. But we don't have to be so wary. I understand that journalism would want to be absolutely neutral and not be dependent on governments. But remember, a legislation is not the government. A legislation is technically for the people, by the people, because when a parliament enacted law comes through, it is as a representative of the people and not for their own sake that a legislator is supposed to be functioning. And in that, if you're likely to get something where, and if you look at the Australian example, and that's the reason I'm emphasizing this, clearly they say that had the government not intervened, then legacy media would not have got the benefit of, mediated agreements, etc.
Sure.
So when we look at the parliament enacted law, we may want to approach it with caution for sure, but we don't have to totally eschew it.
I think that those are several interesting points you make there. But Vipin Babbi also come in on this because we live in the post-truth era, as it were. And the kind of rampant misinformation that we see, the institution of the editor becomes extremely important. Now, I mean editor in the largest sense of the term, not editor in the sense editor of a news organization, but some sort of an institution that ensures this mechanism of robust verification of facts and accountability of a story. I think that becomes extremely important in this post-truth era.
Yeah,
And
well,
of course,
at the outset, I
with
would
big
like
tech
to.
becoming so important.
Right, right. Thanks, Vedant. So, at the outset, I would actually like to compliment the minister for bringing
Yes.
up this issue. Where a lot of senior journalists and members of Editors Guild of India and others have been bringing it into focus, but somehow this issue has not taken the importance that should have been given to it. The most important thing is yet, the digital media and the print media these days, or maybe electronic media, do not have a level playing field. And I must point out also that, particularly during the COVID pandemic, did provided a big setback to the mainstream media. And that was a time when digital media came up in a big way and social media platforms and all that. But what is happening is, as you rightly pointed out, and also Nirja said, that a lot of effort goes into it. As the institution of editor, you are saying they're the gatekeepers, so a lot of effort goes first in gathering news, then verifying it, cross-checking it, and then finally letting it go and put it up before the readers. What is happening is that the social media platform, they're bringing all kind of news from all sides, putting them on the same platform. So the credibility of the media also suffers, because as far as readers or viewers are concerned, they find the same kind of news or different aspects of the news on the same platform. Either it is by one of the authentic sources, say mainstream media, or there are others who come out with unverified news. So this is creating a bit of credibility gap also. But very importantly, which you have mentioned, that the entire resources are put up by the mainstream media organizations, and these intermediaries come in, and then they take all that, and then they use their algorithms and to have their own biases. And generally, as the minister pointed out, these biases are extreme.
Yes.
So they are wanting, like the TRPs, they are also wanting their viewership or readership to go up, and therefore this kind of this impact is coming up.
Sure.
And impact on intellectual property, certainly. Yeah.
That's an interesting point there, and I'm afraid I'm running out of time. But Neeraj, the last word to you quickly. Would you say in all of this, ultimately the authenticity of news is compromised, even as we look at the diversification of journalism, the diversification of media, the diversification of news? News has certainly been made more accessible, but would you say the authenticity is compromised?
That the authenticity and the factual correctness that we're all talking about and would like, that is the core of media. We will be taken seriously only if we are authentic. And as people say, the newsroom is neutral, must be neutral, and put out what is factually correct for it to be credible and to be taken seriously. I think, again, I would say that the minister has flagged off very important issues, and artificial intelligence also that he's talked about is going to be a thing of the future, posing huge challenges to us in the media. Is not going to be what it was in the past. And he's spoken at the press council. Maybe a body like the press council should take the initiative and initiate a dialogue with all sections of the media. The media
all
today, unfortunately, is highly polarized.
Yes.
With all sections of the media on these issues that the minister has put out today.
Yes, I think that's a good note to end the show on. Then we need to bring all the stakeholders together. And as N.S. Napina also pointed out, we mustn't be so skeptical or so cynical. Of course, there needs to be some level of regulation. But news outlets certainly must be given their due. Thanks all very much for joining us on the show this evening. Well, that's all the time that we have on the show this evening.